Hey everyone, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Joining us today, it is Kevin Borba. He covers the Colorado Buffaloes, the new Locked On Buffs host. For us on today's show, we will break down the idea of Colorado returning to the Big 12. We discuss the idea of Utah joining. We'll obviously cover Arizona and Arizona State next week. But right now, what will it look like if Colorado returns to the Big 12? That's coming up next.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Locked On Big 12 podcast, Josh Neighbors here, joined by Kevin Borba today, the new host of Locked On Buffs. Kevin, welcome to the show and welcome to the Locked On Podcast Network. How's your first foray with Locked On been?
It's been good. Thank you for having me. Loved my first week so far. Everybody's been so kind and just ready to talk some college football and everything in between.
Yeah. So, I've been asking, it's funny. I'm kind of doing this series about the schools that could join the Big 12, the four corner schools, because it's been the big rumor. And while we're doing this series, a lot has been talked about in the realm of, basically having the Pac-12 television deal play out in real time. And you cover that part of the country, you know it very, very well. You cover Stanford, you cover Colorado. And so it's, it's gotten to the point now where we're hearing, okay, Apple TV Plus is going to, might save the day. And I want to get your thoughts on that, but also kind of big picture, like what is a win for the Pac-12 in terms of a television contract? Years, numbers, visibility. What do you think a win looks like given where things have been trending? Now, obviously a big win would be like, $40 million per school, whatever, but like a reasonable win for the Big 12 and your thoughts on the Apple TV Plus news.
Yeah, first of all, the Pac-12 media rights little area has become a very toxic place on social media. I think every expert and analyst out there is trying to bring down everybody else who's like just trying to cover what's happening. So that's been an interesting little development there. I think in terms of Apple or just like the value they can get, I think their goal was to exceed whatever the Big 12's number was. And I think that was 35, right? Or 31, something.
31. Yeah, 31 is what I've been going with.
I think 35 is like 35 to 40 would be their goal. Whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. I feel like they kind of waited a very long time to put things together. Apple or Amazon Prime or wherever they're streaming, because a big part of the Pac-12's new deal is going to be streaming based. I think it's a plus. I think a lot of people are kind of shooting it down because it's like, oh, I don't want to watch another streaming service. Well, the other Pac-12 games weren't watchable anyway, unless you had the Pac-12 network. My former employer, we were not available to everybody on cable everywhere. It's like you had to have a certain cable package that included the Pac-12 network. And so I think people will subscribe to Apple. And if they have it already, good. If they don't, they'll probably get it if they want to watch Pac-12 football. I think it makes it more accessible. And I think it's a better deal than people realize. Like, I think in terms of losing USC and UCLA, you're only going to get so much. Like, those are two marquee brands. And majority of the Pac-12 just doesn't have the cachet that they're losing and that they have at the top. So I think you're kind of stuck with what the hand you're dealt. And this is why the Big 12 realignment talks are so well and alive, because everybody knows it's not going to be as well as they hoped.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So this is the second time that I've talked to somebody last week, Pac-12 related, where they're like, well, the Pac-12 network wasn't really available anyway. And, this at least, like, you can kind of guarantee, like, this is a la carte, right? You can go and pay for it. You know where it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And that is a true point. I would also say, though, that the big deviation from that would really be going back to cable, right? Like, okay, we've had a channel that is only with, what was it? Was it not on DirecTV or was it on DirecTV? I forgot
I think it was on, oh my gosh, I should know this. I worked there. I don't even know.
Comcast.
I think it was Comcast. I think it was Comcast, actually, now that you say that.
And so I don't think DirecTV folks had it, whatever it was.
Right.
And somebody will probably correct us in the comments, whatever. But like the whole point was it's not available. So you think the big deviation would be to go back to cable. And it's funny because during my time at SiriusXM, I mentioned this a bunch. I was working the Pac-12 channel a few times, and George Kliavkoff came on and said, I think the next television contract round of them for everybody is going to be on cable. And so because of the way things have played out, because CBS and NBC and Fox and ESPN have all kind of been, and Disney have all kind of been satisfied. Like, there are new exciting partners, but the big cable giants really don't seem that interested. We saw that CBS and Turner bailed out. We heard from Andrew Marchand in the New York Post that Amazon and ESPN are kind of lukewarm. And he really says Fox hasn't been that, he used Fox in that group too, but I feel like lukewarm is kind of courteous almost. They don't seem to have much interest at all. And so while you're saying this might be preferable to the Pac-12 network, it is still a solely streaming platform.
Right. Yeah.
And do you have some concerns? I know Stanford maybe is a bit more ironclad brand, I guess, but like, are people really watching Stanford? Like, are they really, really watching Stanford?
I mean,
I think
I don't know if you saw Dennis Dodd's article, which I think had a redaction in it, but Stanford was I think it was the Stanford Cal game from 2021 or 2022. One of the past 2 years was one of the most watched Pac-12 games.
Yeah.
Stanford was on ESPN week 2 against USC. That was the Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley's first game. So right. I think
if they're good, their brand is good.
Yeah, I think Stanford picked like they picked the worst time to struggle in terms of like,
right.
It's like in terms of like media rights deals and expansion, because now everybody sees Stanford as like a Vanderbilt, and it's like they've never been a Vanderbilt. They're one of the like all-time out of this past decade. They're one of the winningest programs
right
in college football. It's just like these past 4 or 5 years just have not been representative of the whole body of work, and we have recency bias in pretty much everything we do. And so that's what we remember.
And then Colorado, obviously, visibility is gonna be big for them because they're in a transition period right now where for football, like they've got a coach who is an all eyes on me guy, and they want really all eyes to be on them.
Yeah.
And maybe they're the type of brand that, that can survive this kind of thing because people are going to want to come watch Colorado right now. But like, you can't guarantee how long the Deion Sanders effect is going to last, how long he's going to be there, how good they're going to be, all those things. And so from Colorado's perspective, like, where do you think Colorado minds being on that platform, or because of the visibility argument, like this is a period of time where really it would be important for them to be on cable?
Yeah, I think Colorado's a special case. I think they want to be on cable just because I think they have all the attention in the world right now on them. And so I think you got to take advantage of that. Eyes on the program is eyes on the program, though. So I don't know if they're going to be, say, upset that they're on streaming, but I think we have to take into account, and this is just how it works out. Oregon, when I was at the Pac-12 network, their spring game was on the Pac-12 network. Colorado's spring game is going to be on ESPN. I talked about it yesterday at one of my Locked On episodes. Colorado has sold 30,013-ish tickets, which is almost as many as a 7-year attendance combined from the 7 past spring games. So I think Colorado has that brand anyway. And I think in a Pac-12 that's going to be looking for a new face, obviously Oregon and Washington kind of have they have the advantage over Colorado. I think Colorado, just by having Deion Sanders and all these transfers, I think they want to figure out a way to get them on cable is kind of what they have working for them too.
Right. They're getting 1 year of that guaranteed, right? And the next year, obviously, the deal. And that's why it's crazy. I think it's like, they got 1 more year of this TV deal. And they got to figure out where the hell the games are going to be.
Right.
Coming up after that. Quick word from our sponsors. Today's show brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, #1 sportsbook in America. You guys want to bet on next year's college football, some futures, they have those there. Obviously, college hoops is rocking and rolling right now. Conference tournaments are coming up as well. Those are always my favorite. Actually, I'm actually more of a fan of the conference tournaments. I love betting on those actually more than the NCAA tournament. I feel like there's a little more volatility with those NCAA tournament games sometimes. So I feel like the conference tournaments can be a bit of a safer bet, but you guys can find that at the FanDuel Sportsbook now. FanDuel.com/lockedon to get you guys some money back and free bets. If you lose your first bet, make every moment matter more with FanDuel Sportsbook today. All right. So what has been the Colorado fan reaction whenever this conversation point gets brought up about the idea of, and they're pretty special in this, right, of rejoining the Big 12, ironically, like rejoining the conference and coming back home, if you will. And, do they want to do it by themselves? They want to do it with the other schools? Do fans, is it 50-50? Like, no, let's stay here. No, let's go away. A great point that was made yesterday by JT Wisterstill, Locked On Utah, said that, look, it's easier to win. Like, it might be easier to win in the Pac-12, at least if you're Utah. Like, just there are more free wins, and Colorado's actually been one of those recently. But Arizona's been kind of a freer win. ASU's been a freer win. Cal has been a freer win. Stanford's been a freer win. I even chuck Colorado in there being free. I mean, those are 5 teams that have not been very good as of late. Mm-hmm. And we saw it in the Big 12 this year. None of that. There was zero of that. So does that factor in? Just what is the overall fan appetite been for a move back to the Big 12?
Yeah, I think the fans actually, and this might surprise you, I think they want to go back to the Big 12 for the most part. From what I've heard, is I think everybody, and this is pretty crazy for everybody to know the name Larry Scott is insane, because most of the times people don't know who a college commissioner is, and there's really no reason to know who a college commissioner is unless they're frequently in. Like, we know the Pac-12 commissioner, we know Kevin Warren from the Big Ten, who obviously left the Big Ten. The Big 12 commissioner, Brett Yormark, obviously we know him, and SEC commissioner, we all know who that is. It's just like the fact that Larry Scott has been out of the job for a few years and he's still a focal point shows how bad the Pac-12 was in turn, not the conference itself, but just the overall media rights stuff under him was. So Colorado fans, I think, actually would want to return to the Big 12. And while the Big 12 is more, okay, I don't want to upset my Pac-12 fans, because I think the Pac-12 was, if you had all the top teams go head to head, I kind of like the Pac-12 this past season, even with TCU. I feel like that'd be a good matchup. I don't know, USC and TCU, that'd be tough. But I think the Pac-12 got really good this past year, and so it's disappointing.
The top of the league.
They had six or seven teams that were in Pac-12 championship contention until like the second to last week or third to last week, and so very holistic. The Big 12, yeah, it's very competitive. I think being in there, and then also the Big 12 is up for grabs in terms of you don't have a brand that is like, this is, even though Texas hasn't been good, Texas is the Big 12's brand. Oklahoma as well.
Oklahoma is, yeah,
they're the Big 12 brand. Yeah. And so they lost that. So they don't have a face. And so Colorado comes in, they could be the face if they're good. Utah, same thing. They could be the face. There's a reason that TCU is really trying to push that they're the premier team in the Big 12. It's because they know there's no face right now. And so that is up for grabs. And while there's a lot of free wins in the Pac-12, would you rather have free wins, or would you rather be the face of a conference? Because the face of the Pac-12 is probably going to be Oregon, Washington, Utah. So for Colorado, unless they have Deion Sanders and they ascend to the top right away, they're not going to be the face. In the Big 12, they have that opportunity. Because Oklahoma State's they're not moving the needle. TCU might move the needle, but we have to see what they can do.
Well, I've said this a bunch. In the last 3 Big 12 championship games, there have been 6 different teams, right? So it's been ever since Oklahoma's dominance, it's been a revolving door. Mm-hmm. And they have really good teams that play. It's very cyclical in this league, and so it's a great point. Like Colorado in the right year, good, and it's about remaining there. And I think it'd be interesting to do it. I think the one thing about the Pac-12 is, if you can get like a pretty competent defense, you've got a really good chance at winning that league, because the quarterback play is really good. I think just what's going to start deciding the league is probably the defense, right? Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, that seems fair. Because honestly, and this is no bias at all, the Pac-12 this next season will have the best quarterbacks from top to bottom. Okay, maybe not the bottom, but like I would say 1 through
maybe
7 to 8. I would take them over most quarterbacks across the country, and I think, like you said, a solid defense will take you a long way. I think USC.
I mean, I thought I was watching Big 12. Like people were like Big 12 7-on-7. Like watch some USC games last year. My God, they couldn't stop anybody.
Don't blame Alex Grinch on the Pac-12. That's not fair.
That's true. That's a Big 12 problem too. So don't worry about that. That's a Big 12 problem also.
Yeah, I think the Pac-12 has some solid defenses. I just think, like USC, they struggled. We knew that was going to happen, though, with Lincoln Riley. I used to cover Texas, so I'm well aware of the Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch effect, where they go up by 20 or 30, and then all of a sudden, once that late third quarter comes, the offense sputters, and the defense is just kind of not doing much. But yeah, a solid defense gets you a long way. I think Utah they had potential with their defense and just didn't work out in terms of the first week against Florida. They don't lose that game, and then whoever they lost to in the middle of the season, they're in the playoff. USC doesn't blow again. Alex Grinch doesn't blow a 20-point lead against Utah in the Pac-12 championship. And they're in the playoff.
Tulane too.
Yeah, and TCU might not be in the playoff if USC has a competent defense. And so, yeah, I think a defense goes a long way in college football, just in general. I mean, we've seen Georgia win the past 2 championships, and it's it's been because they have one of the best defensive minds out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because the Big 12 defenses have improved so much. I mean,
Yeah.
Iowa State last year, the numbers heading into the last week of the season is if they had scored 20 points in their first 11 games, they would have been 8-3.
Yep.
I mean, and they ended up winning 4 or 5 games last year. It's like, oh my God, the defense level. Now this year, TCU's defense there's a lot of star players. I'll tell you this, a lot of star players in a lot of the defenses this year. The defenses as a whole maybe weren't excellent, but like I think you saw it. Even though Michigan put up some big numbers, like the playmaking ability in the defenses has definitely improved. And I think that's kind of where the Pac-12 just needs to get to that point where it's like, we got some playmakers, and I kind of feel like Utah had that a bit this year, but generally speaking, their defense was not like fantastic, as good as it normally was.
I don't know if it's as bad as peak Big 12, where it was like every game was like 55 to 40, but I think
my point was more like when I watched UCLA and USC this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the Oregon State game was interesting because Oregon State ran the ball like 30 straight times to close the game out, whatever it was. Yeah. So but I mean they couldn't stop them, which was like also I was like, this is the Big 12 defense, old Big 12 defensive front. So that was more reminiscent of old school Big 12 games than a lot of the Big 12 games were.
For sure.
So I think that's a really interesting concept. About and look. I think you make a great point about Colorado fitting in terms of like there's a chance to get an opportunity here. But as it pertains, one more question about Colorado football, like how long do you think Deion Sanders is there? Is he there for a good time, not a long time? I mean, what do you think is the most likely outcome? Because I kind of lean that way.
I don't know. I feel like it depends on where Colorado goes as like conference wise. I mean, he's in a Power 5 either way, assuming the Pac-12 doesn't like completely dissolve and like merge with the Mountain West, not the Big 12, excuse me. And I feel like that'd be worst case scenario. But even then, Colorado's going to end up in the Big 12 or what's left of the Pac-12. So they're going to be in a Power 5 conference. With the playoff expanding, there's going to be a chance for whatever conference he's in to make the playoff because obviously they have the automatic bid for the conference champions or the 6 best conference champions, however you want to word it. I don't know. I feel like he's obviously going to be there until his son Shadar leaves. So that gives him that gives him this year. He'll probably stay a second year. I don't know. I feel like that's a great question because I think a lot of people see this Colorado job as kind of like a stepping stone job for him. And he really loves Boulder is what he's saying. And now obviously he's not going to go out and say, I hate Boulder in his first 3 months on the job.
Generally speaking, it's hard to hate Boulder, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a beautiful place, and I feel like he keeps saying he loves it. And so, I don't know. I feel like I personally felt like I knew he was going to leave Jackson State. Just the way he's hyping up Boulder and stuff, I feel like there's a different vibe around it. Jackson State just always seemed like,
it
seemed temporary. Yeah, it seemed temporary. No, there's no way around it. I think you could just tell that there was no. Especially with the way when all the reports came out with all the funding issues and the water pressure or the water issues where the state lost their water and just all the overall funding wasn't there. And I think him being at a Power 5 program just makes his job easier. But hey, if there's a job out there in Florida, Tallahassee specifically, that maybe opens up and they offer him the gig, I don't know if he would be able to turn that down. I think it just depends on the job.
Right. And I'm asking you this before he's even coached a game, so it's a little bit unfair, but I just think, coming into it, like I think it's been a big talking point. And maybe this same thing kind of applies to basketball. I mean, what's the temperature on Tad Boyle right now? Because they didn't make the tournament last year, I don't think.
No, they did not.
And they're not going to make it this year, clearly.
Yeah.
Unless they win the Pac-12 tournament, which if you told me somebody like I'd be surprised if somebody not named USC, UCLA, or Arizona won it.
Yeah.
But I'd be like, whoa,
this would be the year.
That's been a bad conference this year when it comes to basketball.
This would be the year to do that though, because the Pac-12 has not been. Last year it was like juggernauts on juggernauts. It's like UCLA could win the championship, Arizona could win the championship.
Like you're probably gonna have a Final Four in the Pac-12 tournament that includes like 2 teams that are not in the tournament currently.
Like Stanford might end up making it to the semifinals for no reason, just because they play really well against teams that are good. It's just can they not like collapse in the final? They were leading UCLA. They almost beat Arizona and UCLA in like a span of 5 days after losing to like Cal and Chicago, or barely beating Chicago State. Like,
so I'm a believer in this, and I'm not sure what the Tad Boyle situation is going to be, but I'm a believer like that it's going to be very difficult to go to the Big 12 and suck in basketball for very long, because your fans are going to be like, this is not tenable. Like, we can't show up to all these games for 3 or 4 months and be like, and suck. And so I think like the Big 12 being so good at basketball essentially forces you to invest.
yeah.
And so I think no matter who the coach is, it'd be successful. But who do we think? Is he cool? Are we cool? Or is the heat on a little bit?
So I feel like the heat is on, but I also feel like we have to consider, and I pulled this up right now, they have the number 17 recruiting class in the country right now, headlined by Cody Williams, the 5-star. They have, I don't want to mess up his name, I think it's Asane Diop, who is a 4-star. And then they have another 3-star coming in. Cody Williams is a projected, I don't know if you saw ESPN's top or mock draft yesterday with Bronny James' top 10 pick. Number 2 was Cody Williams, which is the future of Colorado. And so I don't know if you risk losing a potential top 5 pick, because obviously they say not to commit to the coach, but every college player, regardless of the sport, is committing to the coach. Like, that is, there's no,
Kansas players are committing to play for Bill Self.
Yes, they're like,
that's how that works. Especially basketball. Basketball is much more you committing to the coach. Football maybe can be not as much, but
every basketball player thinks they're going one and done, regardless of like where they're at. And so they're committing to that coach for the year. And I think, I don't know, I'm new to the Colorado scene, so I don't want to make any like broad judgments, but I just like Stanford's in a similar situation where their coach hasn't been performing, but they also have a couple 5-stars. And it's like, do you want to risk losing what could be next year, or do you want to try to get a fresh start? Because there's a lot of coaches on the market right now that are enticing, like a former Big 12 coach from Texas who legal issues are obviously we're all well aware of, but there's already reports that Ole Miss and someone else are going after Chris Beard. And so there's going to be a lot of people looking for jobs. Rick Pitino out there at Iona, I don't think he's going to stay there forever. So it just depends on where the program, how serious they take basketball and how serious they think they could be in terms of retaining these top recruits.
All right, Kevin, where can people find you and your work and all of its variety?
Yeah, you can find me at Kevin_Borba on Twitter. I'm at All Cardinal as well. That's where I cover Stanford. I have at Locked Buffs on Athlon, where I'll have all my Colorado stuff. And then, of course, you can find me at Locked on Buffs, where I'm talking recruiting, transfers, football, everything in between. We're going to have some cool interviews coming up with new transfers and 5-star recruit potentially. So, yeah, just find me anywhere. Nice. I'm always posting about something, so find me and we'll talk.
Awesome. Kevin Borba, Locked on Buffs. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.